Hello soulmates, let's make this lovely dress on the thumbnail. We are going to draft on the paper, then later we transfer it on the fabric. Now the first measurement is the shoulder measurement. So this is me marking the shoulder of 8.5 inches. Then the breast point is 10 inches, the underbust is 14, then the waist length is 17 inches. So I'm going to mark the same line so I can square up the lines. After squaring it up, I went ahead to add ½ inch to the shoulder measurement, that is for seam allowance. Then I use a neck width of 5 inches and the shoulder slant is 1 inch. Then I went ahead to mark 8 inches for the chest line. Then I'll also square up the line. On the 8 inches, I'm going to put in the shoulder measurement of 8.5. Then I will also connect the lines. Then I'm going to mark the shoulder slant that way. So for now, I'll leave the neckline. We'll come back to that later. Then I'm using 4.5 inches for the nipple to nipple measurement. That is 9 inches divided by 2. So I'm just indicating the chest line, the breast point, the underbust, and the waist length. So I'll rule the nipple to nipple measurement from the breast point to the waistline. Then on the waistline, I'm taking in that of 0.75 on both sides. Yeah. So I will connect it to the breast point. Then the next thing is to put in the round bust measurement on the chest line. The round bust for this tutorial is 39. So I divided it by 4 and I put it there. I also repeat it on the breast point. Then the under bust is 32 inches. I mark it divided by 4. Then I replace that intake there. I replace it. I did the same thing for the waist measurement, 32 divided by 4. Then I replace the dart of 1.5. Yeah. So I'm trying to connect it. Okay guys, for the bust darts, I'm using 1.5 inches. That is the difference between the client's waist length, front waist length and back waist length. I connected it to the breast point. Then I went ahead to add 1.5 inches sewing allowance. Then I'm going to connect the breast point to that way, but by the time I connect that breast point, you realize that it is now more than 1.5 inch. But when you are going to sew your fabric, please let it be 1.5 inch so that the front will not be too short than the back. Then I'm just connecting that way. I added allowance so that when I pick up the dart, it doesn't get short on the fabric. We're just going to be connecting the armhole. So whatever you have left after your shoulder slant to your chest line, you divide it by 2. Then I'm going to go in by 0.75 on this front pattern. Then I'm going to connect it to the round bust measurement. Okay guys, yeah, so we're done with this. Like I said, the fabric is folded into 2 because of the neckline we are trying to create. If it's not a neckline, I wouldn't have used fold it into 2. I would have used a single paper. Yeah, I would have used a single pattern paper. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my tracing wheel to just trace out all the lines, everything I'm going to be cutting out. I'm going to trace it out so that I can mark it from the back. Now if you don't have a tracing wheel, just use your hand. Everything you create here, recreate it on the other side. So after tracing it, I'm the only one that can see this, you can't see that, so I'm just going to be using my my ruler to mark out every point that I trace. So as a designer, you need to get a tracing wheel, or better still, like I said, mark everything all together. So you can see that we have the front basic pattern, everything is ready. So the 5 inches I have there, I also repeat it on that side. I'm just trying to make it visible. Now to get the neck depth, I went down by 6.5 inches. So I ruled that 6.5. Now I'm going to be showing you the neck, even though it is on the thumbnail. You can see how the shape is. Yeah, one part is way more slanted than the other part. So on this other side, I mark 2.5 inches and I connect it to the 5 inches neck width. So I'm trying to show you that it is 2.5 inches that I mark there. Then from that point, I'm going to connect it to that 2.5 inch. So now I'm using my curve ruler. I did not use the straight ruler. I'm using my curve ruler to mark it. When I mark it, I realize it's not curvy enough, so I use the part that is very curvy to connect it to the other side. So you can see the difference. So we are going to cut out that part. Now, can you see that when I fold it into two and I cut, the neck is totally different. So that is why you have to drop this pattern, the two. Now for this other extra fabric that they added there, I'm going to cut out the neck, that's the shoulder line. I'm cutting it or just blending it into the armhole. Now for this part, I'm still going to do a modification later, but let's just go on. So this is me cutting the fabric now, sorry, the pattern paper, after doing everything. So I'm trying to get the shape for the seam allowance. After cutting it, this is what we have. So this is our neck shape. Now if you're going to sew on the fabric, that is the bust dart. Now this bust dart, we are sewing it on the fabric, and the waist dart, we are not closing it. We are going to be sewing it on the fabric because that is how the style is. So for that other black and white pattern paper we are going to use, I'm cutting it out. So we'll be cutting this piece on another fabric different from the fabric we are going to be using to sew the dress. So this is the piece. I'm just trying to write up and armhole, so I'll know where to place when I'm sewing. Now guys, because we have this very slanty line, I'm going to be tightening it. And how do you tighten? Just mark out any line and connect it to your breast point. Yes, then I'm going to be tightening it with 1/2 inch. So I'll mark 1/2 inch. I'll come down from that point by 1/2 inch. You can either go up or come down. Then connect it also to the breast point, and you'll be closing it up. And this is how I close. I just fold it on each other from 1 to the 1/2 inch. Then you blend it into the breast point. Then I went ahead to use my marking tape to just hold it down. So after using the marking tape, this is how it's going to be. Now you can now cut it. So if you have any little shortage there, just blend it with your scissors. Okay, so mates, after cutting that small piece, I realized that it is too small, so I had to gum it back. Now we'll be extending it. So the initial cut was just on the shoulder line, but from the shoulder line along the slant line, I came down by 2 inches. Yeah, so I'm just going to blend it into the armhole, just like we did when we're cutting the first one. Yes, so now I'll be cutting that part out. Yeah, because it was too small initially, it was too small, so we just had to increase it. So this is how it is going to be. So I'm going to cut 2 of this on this black and white fabric. So guys, we're drafting the back now, and I'm indicating the zip allowance. So I mark 1 inch all the way down, then I roll it. So starting from the zip line, I'm going to put in the shoulder measurement of 8.5 inches. Then from there, I mark the chest line of 8 inches. Then the remaining length is the length. So the length is 15.5 for the back. If you minus 1.5 from 17 inches, you have 15.5. On the chest line, I put in the bust measurement, the shoulder measurements, and I rule it all the way down. So I mark 1 inch for the shoulder slant and 5 inches for the neck width. Then I connect the slanty line, the shoulder slant. Then for the back neck depth, I mark 1.5 inches. So I'm going to be connecting it to the 5 inches. It depends on whatever neck you want to create for your back. After that, guys, I'm going to mark whatever I have left there. I'll divide it by 2 so we can form our armhole. Now for this back armhole, I went in by 1/2 inch. Then I put in the round bust measurement on the chest line, and I added 1.5 inches sewing allowance. So for this back dart, I mark 5 inches. You know the front is 4.5, but for the back I mark 5 inches. Sometimes I used to add 0.25 on it because I'll be taking off some inches away from inside. But let's proceed. So for the dart, I mark 1/2 inch on both sides. Then I came down by 1 inch from the chest line. Then I connect it to the 1/2 inch on both sides. So that is our back dart. Now I'm going to be putting the round waist measurement on the back. I'm repeating the 1 inch. Then I'm also adding the sewing allowance of 1.5 inches. So this is me connecting the lines. Then I'm also going to use my armhole curve to connect the armhole. So guys, to tighten the back to avoid any gaping, from the zip allowance I went in by 0.75. You can do 1 inch if you want 100% contouring. Then I connected it to the starting line first. Then I now mark 1 inch from the 0.75 that I took inside. Can you see it? Yes. So from that 1 inch, you now connect it to your main zip allowance. That is why I mark 4.5 inches, 5 inches for our darts, for our back dart, because I'm taking some away from inside. Now, if you want to sew on your fabric, still go ahead and put your normal 1.5 inches sewing allowance, because our back is different from the front, so it will not affect your allowance. And I've cut out this, so we are done drafting the back. Now let's draft the skirt pattern. So I took 9 inches, that is the hip length, and I square it up. So from the hip length, I went down by 10 inches. That indicates the knee line. Even though we are not going to use any knee length on this tutorial. On the waistline, guys, I marked the waist measurement divided by 4. I added 1.5 inches sewing allowance. On the hip is 43 divided by 4 is 10.75 plus 1.5 inch sewing allowance. Now I'm trying to get the full length, so I minus 17 inches from the starting line, and the length of this dress is 48, and I added 2 inches hemming allowance. So I'll square up the line. After that, guys, whatever I have on the hip, since the hip is 10.75, I minus 2 inches from it, that is 8.75, because it's a pencil dress. So I've gone ahead to mark it, and I added the sewing allowance. After that, I'm going to roll all the line. Then on the hip, I'm just trying to use the hip curve, and I'm going to be cutting it off. So we are done drafting the front. Now for the back, I'm going to place the front on another paper for the back. Then I'm extending the hip line, just the hip line. So on that hip, I added 1.5 inch sewing allowance, that's zip allowance. Then I added 1 inch on the waistline. The 1.5 is just to give it a little bit of comfort around the butt area. So I connected the line together. Then I'm going to be on the knee line, I added 1 inch, then the hemline 1 inch. Those are the sewing allowance, that is for zip. So you connect the line all the way down. Then I'm cutting it off. So we have our front and back. I just notch the back so I'll know the back, because sometimes it look like the same. Now for the front part, to get the slit for the front, I actually did a mistake before, but I corrected it. So I fill up another paper on it. Now we have our front, that's the center line. So from the center line is where we are going to be minusing some inches. Now I took in 2 inches. You can do 1.5 inch if you don't want it to be too open. Then you connect it to the hip line, to the knee line. Then I'm just going to be slanting it that way. Then I will cut it off. Now for this design, some people would think it's actually an overlap, but I had to go to Pinterest to search for the pictures proper. So that was when I noticed that it was just some inches they took from the hem to the nail. So let's continue. Now that is the piece. I cut another fabric, white and black. I cut 2 pieces for it. Then for the back, I cut the lining and the actual fabric. I'm using the same material for the lining for this upper part. Now I notch all the darts, all our darts. I notch it on the fabric. Then the bust darts I also notch. Now for the back piece, I cut out the back. Then I notch the zip allowance side. Then for the front, I cut 2 pieces for the front, because I want to use the same fabric to turn that slit. I don't want to just fold it. It might look rough, but if you don't have enough fabric, you can just fold it in. You weave it, then you fold it in. So we're going to be sewing all this now. So I'm going to take that side piece. So you place it on one side and you sew it. So for the lining, you place it on the lining also, and you're going to sew. You're going to sew. Then you're going to sew your darts. Now, like I said, these darts, please just sew your darts, and also sew the back as well. So let me do that for all our pieces. After sewing the darts and everything, this is how it is. I did that for the lining piece. Now we are going to be turning the neckline. So you place it on each other, right side to right side, and you're going to be sewing the neckline. After sewing, you're going to, now I've gone ahead to sew, and I'm going to use my machine to just lock all the sides I've done that for the back piece also. I've also turned the neckline, and I've also used my machine to just secure all the sides together. So you're going to place it on each other, right side to right side. We are going to sew the shoulder points, and I'm going to be sewing with the 1.5 inch sewing allowance on the sides. After sewing, guys, this is it. So it is like this. Our dress is almost ready. So for the skirt, like I said, I cut out 2 pieces. You're going to place it on each other, right side to right side, and you're going to be sewing the inside, then so you can turn it. Now for the back, I'm going to be sewing the zip allowance, but before I do that, I went ahead to take the upper pattern. Now because of that 0.75 I went in, so I'm minusing because there is no dart on the skirt, so I'm minusing the darts of the upper part so I can place it on it. So after doing that, you can see we have a shortage of that 0.75 we cut. So I'm going to indicate the 0.75 and cut it. So this is me marking the hip line of the skirt. So that is 0.75, and I also mark the zip allowance proper. I hope you understand. So I'm cutting off the 0.75. We cut it into the hip line. Now I'm putting in the 1 inch sewing allowance all the way down. So after sewing, guys, this is how it is, and I went ahead to use my needle and thread to just stitch it because I do not want to top stitch, and if you do not top stitch, when you iron, it might not give you a neat finishing. So I use my needle and thread to sew it, then I now iron. By the time I lose that part off, everything will just stay flat. That's another technique I'm teaching you guys. So the skirt, I've also sewed the zip allowance. Now we're going to be placing it on each other, right side to right side, and you sew with your 1.5 inches sewing allowance you added when you were cutting. After doing that, guys, this is how our skirt is. It is looking all neat and beautiful. Then for the hemline, you're going to fold it in and hem it with the allowance you added when you be drafting your own. Now I'm going to lose the zip side. I'm going to lose it up to the hip line so that we can attach the upper part and also fix our zip. So for the upper part also, I'm also losing the zip side. Then I notch the midpoints of the upper part and also of the skirt, so you can place them on each other and sew with 1/2 inch to the other side and sew with 1/2 inch to the side. Then I'll fix the zip. So guys, this is it. I've gone ahead to fix the zip, and I also overlock everything inside. I've weaved it. Now this is how it is. It is looking all neat and beautiful. We are almost ready. So the next thing we'll do is to attach our sleeve. So I've cut the sleeve. You all know how to cut sleeve. So I'm going to be sewing the sleeve and fixing it to the armhole of the dress. After fixing the sleeve on the dress, this is how our dress is looking like. Now I'm going to be removing this stitch. Yeah, so now for the band, the one you see on the slit to the waist, this is how you just connect it. Just curve it in a slanty form, then towards into the seam allowance by the side. Yeah, so you're going to lose back what you've sewn and it will enter that seam allowance. Can you see how the line is? So when I measured the line, the total of what is giving me is 45 to 48 inches. So you just have to cut extra length, so whatever that is remaining, you're going to cut it off. Now this is the black and white fabric I'll be using, so I folded it into two. Now I'm going to be cutting 5 inches on fold. Then if I'm fixing it on the dress, you notice at the hem it was tiny, then when it got to this waist side it was big. So you just trim it according to how you see it on the picture. I'll see you all in my next tutorial. Bye.